All right, let's get started. Good morning again. Thank you for being here. Welcome to the Marin Focus Workshop. To start things off, I would like to introduce and welcome Marin County Supervisor and MTC Commissioner Damon Connolly, as well as Novato Mayor Pro Tem and ABAG Executive Board Member Pat Eklund. They're going to provide the welcoming remarks, so I'll hand it off to Commissioner Connolly. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie, and good morning, everyone. As mentioned, I'm Marin County Supervisor and MTC Commissioner Damon Connolly, and I'm joined by Novato Mayor Pro Tem Pat Eklund. We would like to welcome you to the Plan Bay Area 2050 Digital Public Workshop. We are happy you are joining us this morning for a workshop focused on Marin County. I want to start off by saying that we hope you, your family, and loved ones are safe and healthy during this challenging time. This workshop is one of 9 county-focused workshops we'll be holding. Given the requirement to physically distance, MTC and ABAG will be holding all of these workshops digitally and by telephone. While some of the information presented today will be about Marin County, we welcome anyone to participate. Today's staff will address Marin projects, including the 101 to 580 direct connector and transit improvements. We will also hear about the low-lying areas in Marin, along Highway 101 and in central San Rafael that will be impacted by sea level rise. The draft blueprint includes strategies to protect our communities. We are seeking input on Plan Bay Area 2050's draft blueprint, a 30-year regional vision that seeks to create a more affordable, connected, diverse, healthy, and vibrant Bay Area for all. The draft blueprint is the first draft of Plan Bay Area 2050, integrating 25 resilient and equitable strategies that aim to make the Bay Area a better place in the areas of transportation, housing, the environment, and the economy. The blueprint is a critical step in the Plan Bay Area 2050 process, and we have engaged the Bay Area public over the last 2 years in order to get input on the strategies we will review today. So again, welcome, and with that, I'm now going to turn it over to my Marin County colleague, Mayor Pro Tem of Novato, Pat Eklund. Pat.
Thank you very much, Supervisor Connolly. And I would also like to wish everyone a good morning. And I'm really glad that you were able to join us this morning so that we could present some really important information about the Bay Area and Marin County to you. And also to get, more importantly, to get your input. What we hear today from you will help us refine the draft blueprint, which is slated for approval this fall and will be integrated into Plan Bay Area 2050 before it is adopted by ABAG, Association of Bay Area Governments, and the Metropolitan Transportation Commission sometime in mid-2021. In addition to acknowledging a lot of challenges that we have, especially what we're experiencing with the pandemic, we also want to state our support of the Black community and those affected by violence and injustice that has claimed way too many lives here in the Bay Area and around the entire country. As representatives of regional agencies that focus on transportation, on housing, the economy, and more importantly, the environment of the Bay Area, it's our role to really increase access to opportunities and places for people to live. We stand side by side with those working towards having and ensuring a fair and just society. And again, on behalf of the Metropolitan Transportation Commission and the Association of Bay Area Governments, I really want to thank you for spending a couple of hours with us to provide your input. And with that, I have the honor of turning this over to our Metropolitan Transportation Commission Deputy Executive Director, Brad Paul, who is a Marin County resident, and he's going to make a few opening remarks.
Thanks, Pat, and good morning. I'm happy to be here today to welcome you all. And as Pat mentioned, I moved to Marin in 2006 when my son was 3 years old. And next week he turns 17. Like you, I've been to a number of these workshops in Marin, as well as a number of Mayor Pat Eklund's Marin ABAG delegate meetings. But this is my first digital meeting in Marin. I'd like to take a moment just to mention ABAG and MTC's equity platform, which highlights our commitment to equity within our two agencies. For more information about the equity platform, the website address is listed here. As you've heard, Plan Bay Area 2050's draft blueprint is a culmination of more than 2 years of work, talking with the public about their vision for the Bay Area and the strategies that will make a difference in the future. The information we'll present today is a culmination of all that input, but we look forward to hearing from you today with your questions, comments, and suggestions. Without further ado, I'd like to turn it back to Leslie from our staff, who will walk you through the next steps in the workshop. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Brad. Thank you, Supervisor Connolly and Mayor Pro Tem Eklund. I'm Leslie Lar Enriquez, and I work in public engagement at MTC and ABAG, and I will serve as your host for this morning's workshop. I'm so happy that you're joining you this morning to help get your input on the draft blueprint, which, as you've heard, it's very important for us. I'd like to provide an overview of today's workshop. First, MTC and ABAG planning staff members Dave Vaughton and Michael Gurmarad will introduce Plan Bay Area and its draft blueprint. This will include an introductory video that will help us provide the detail about the blueprint. And next, they will share findings from the strategies analyzed as part of the draft blueprint and review the local impacts. We will pause for clarifying questions via the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. Please note you may type your questions and comments there at any time during the presentation. Then they will walk you through our interactive poll activity. This is where we will use the Poll EV program, and we'll explain how to use the program in the next slide, so don't worry. Our planning staff will then highlight important regional programs before we move into our broader Q&A and answer period. And finally, we will wrap up by providing information about how you can access additional resources and provide additional input. Okay, before we dig into the presentation, I'd like to go over a handful of logistics for this morning's workshop. I want to note that the workshop is being recorded and the recording will be posted to the Plan Bay Area website. Also, to ensure that all participants can provide input, everyone will be muted during the workshop. But we encourage you to ask your questions using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So please type your questions or comments there at any time during the workshop. And staff will answer questions directly in the Q&A feature or during key points of the workshop. As I mentioned, we will also be using the polling platform Poll EV. And to participate in the poll activity, you can use your smartphone, computer, or tablet. For an internet-enabled device, please use a web browser and go to pollev.com/mtcabag302. And when we begin the poll, the questions will populate automatically on your device. I see we do have a phone call of somebody joining us by phone only. So if you are joining us by phone only, you can still participate in the polling activity using the text option on your cell phone. And to participate, please text MTC ABAG 302 to the number 22333. Please note that those of you joining us by phone only will not be able to enter questions and comments through the webinar platform. However, there is an opportunity to submit your comments verbally via phone. After the workshop, you can call our comment line at 415-778-2292 and leave us a message with your comments, which we will enter into the official record. Again, you can participate in the poll by texting your responses to each question. I also want to mention that there are additional ways to provide comments during the public comment period, which runs through August 10. As I just mentioned, you can provide verbal comments by calling our comment line at 415-778-2292. Or if you have detailed written comments, please send them to info@planbayarea.org. And we will post this information again at the end of the workshop. Last, please note that profanity or culturally insensitive comments will not be tolerated at any time. We look forward to a productive workshop, so now let's dive in. Okay, we're going to start off with the icebreaker question so that we can get all comfortable with the polling software we're using. Please go to this PollEV URL on your web browser now. Again, it's pollev.com/mtcabag302 or text mtcabag302 to the number 22333. Okay, the question should be on your web browser now. We would like to know, pre-COVID, how did you typically get to work? If you're joining us by text, again, you can, by phone only, you can text, you can send your response by typing the letter associated with your answer choice. For bus, select A. For subway or train, select B. For personal car, select C. For carpool, select D. For taxi or TNC, like Uber or Lyft, select E. For bike, select F. For walk, select G. For ferry, select H. And for other or not applicable, like for example, you're retired or maybe you skateboard to work, please select I. And we will give you a minute to respond. Looks like there's some answers still coming in, but overall, it looks like the majority traveled by personal car. And then we also have taxi, ferry, and other. And the second highest option so far is bus. Thank you so much for participating. I'm going to turn it over now to our planning staff, Dave and Michael, who will guide us through the content of today's workshop.
Thank you, Leslie. We're excited to be here to talk with you and the public about the Plan Bay Area 2050 Draft Blueprint. We work to create a more comprehensive 30-year vision for the region's future, integrating transportation, housing, the economy, and the environment. Today's presentation will first highlight the strategies at the center of the draft blueprint. Second, touch on some of the key regional and county outcomes. And third, seek input on the challenges that remain prior to the final blueprint phase. As Commissioner Connolly noted in his opening remarks, the draft blueprint is all about working towards the regional vision of a more affordable, connected, diverse, healthy, and vibrant Bay Area, not just for some residents, but for all Bay Area residents. Building on top of more than 2 years of work to develop the most resilient and equitable strategies to tackle our region's big challenges, the draft blueprint includes 25 bold strategies that were approved by the ABAG and MTC boards for study to make the region better for the next generation. It's important to underscore that the strategies presented today are not near-term actions or legislative proposals. They are ideas for cities and towns, counties, the region, and the state to consider over the long term to tackle challenges in the Bay Area and beyond. Of course, we'd be remiss in not acknowledging how profoundly the coronavirus pandemic and the 2020 recession are affecting our lives right now. While we didn't predict the pandemic, we've been planning for uncertainty in recent years. All of the strategies in the draft blueprint have been stress tested against many of the unanticipated forces we are experiencing today, and they held up to those stress tests. These types of forces range from higher levels of telecommuting to greater adoption of e-commerce and to boom-bust economic cycles, among others. While summer 2020 is a great time to ensure our strategies are best aligned with a post-COVID future, it's important to note that some of these strategies are incredibly timely for the moment we're in today. These include quick-build bicycle improvements for a world where public transit has much lower capacity requirements, renter protections for families at risk of eviction, childcare subsidies, and other services for our essential workers, and of course, expanded open space investments for a point in time where we are all too often seeking some respite from sheltering at place at home. The strategies in the draft blueprint are designed to focus new housing and jobs growth to create more walkable communities where transit is more accessible to future residents, while preserving the character of many other existing communities and continuing to protect our open space and agricultural lands. The map here shows the growth pattern envisioned in the draft blueprint, which ultimately focuses housing growth in 3 primary places. First, shown in red are priority development areas, locally nominated places for future growth. In Marin County, these include parts of San Rafael, which are slated for expansion in the final blueprint after City Council action in the last month, as well as part of the 101 corridor in southern Marin County. However, Plan Bay Area 2050 does not focus as much growth in priority development areas as previous iterations of Plan Bay Area. To make progress on critical climate and equity goals, it is essential to consider select additional areas beyond PDAs. MTC and ABAG boards asked staff to explore these areas further in the draft blueprint. These additional growth areas include select transit-rich areas shown in gold, which with frequent bus service, rail service, or ferry service. In Marin County, these include the ferry station areas in Sausalito, Tiburon, and Larkspur, as well as smart rail station areas. These are places where future residents could easily access transit for commute trips, as well as walk or bicycle to schools, shops, and recreation to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And the growth geographies include select high resource areas shown in light blue. These are places with well-resourced schools and great access to parks, as well as more basic transit services. High resource areas can play an important role in addressing the legacy of racial exclusion in communities across the Bay Area, where Black and Brown families were systematically excluded from some places in the region. Often these residents ended up residing in more places with worse air quality, under-resourced schools, and more limited to access to jobs. An example in the case of Marin County would be the city of Richmond, where many low-income workers who work in Marin end up residing and must commute each day across the bridge. Through context-sensitive solutions in high-resource areas like granny flats, duplexes, triplexes, and small-scale garden apartments, high-resource areas can play a role in creating more housing opportunities, especially for lower-income families and communities of color, to help right the wrongs of the 20th century and create a more equitable future for the 21st century. To see more on the growth geographies and growth patterns of the plan, go to planbayarea.org. With that, let's learn more about the full suite of draft blueprint strategies through a brief video describing the draft blueprint and what's included in it. Again, feel free to enter comments and questions into the Q&A box at any time during the presentation, and we will answer them at set points during the webinar.
Hi, thank you for joining us. As we navigate these unprecedented times, we thank you for taking a moment to think about the future. The Metropolitan Transportation Commission and the Association of Bay Area Governments are creating a plan to make the Bay Area more resilient in the face of unexpected challenges like the one we are experiencing now. How we react to these challenges is key to making the Bay Area more affordable, connected, diverse, healthy, and vibrant for all. Over the next few minutes, we will outline our ideas for the future in a plan we call Plan Bay Area 2050, the regional vision for transportation, housing, the economy, and the environment for the next 3 decades. The heart of the plan, what we are calling the blueprint, is what we'll be focusing on today. Over the last 2 years, we asked people like you for ideas on solutions to meet the Bay Area's transportation and housing challenges and ensure the region's economic resilience and extraordinary natural beauty. We analyzed the most promising recommendations to come up with 25 proposed strategies, which together make up the draft blueprint. We're excited to share these strategies and hear how we can fine-tune them in the months ahead. we're looking to improve our transportation system by considering how we can maintain and optimize existing infrastructure, create healthy and safe streets, and enhance regional and local transit. These include integrating fare payment and trip planning for all Bay Area transit agencies, lowering speed limits, and redesigning local streets with community input to promote walking and bicycling, including 7,000 miles of new bike lanes and paths, and advancing transit projects with high ridership, such as a new Trans-Bay rail crossing. We're committed to advancing bold housing strategies that can spur Bay Area housing production, including affordable housing in walkable communities. We can do this by reducing barriers to build housing near transit, transforming aging shopping malls and office parks into neighborhoods, and requiring more affordable housing units be built. To ensure the resilience of our region's economy, we're exploring how we can increase wages and shift the location of jobs by retaining industrial lands that can help us maintain a healthy manufacturing sector, discouraging development of new office parks in areas not well served by transit by imposing a fee on new developments, and expanding a 50% child care subsidy to all low-income households with children under 5, allowing more parents to remain in or enter the workforce. And to protect the natural environment that makes the Bay Area so unique, we are considering how we can reduce risks from hazards and minimize our impact on the environment by adapting to sea level rise in our coastal and bayside communities, expanding our climate program, which implements innovative projects to reduce transportation-related greenhouse gas emissions, and ensuring development is focused within existing city boundaries. Thank you for joining us. Please engage with us on the plan by visiting planbayarea.org or on Facebook and Twitter at MTCBATA. Your input will help us create the final blueprint, which will feed into Plan Bay Area 2050. Thank you.
Here's a quick summary of what you just heard, cutting across all 25 strategies for transportation, housing, the economy, and the environment. Our strategies are divided into 9 key categories. The draft blueprint maintains and optimizes our existing infrastructure while redesigning streets and investing in public transit. It spurs housing production at all income levels and encourages more affordable housing in all communities. It strives to improve economic mobility through childcare subsidies and jobs programs, as well as through strategies to shift the location of jobs. And last but not least, the draft blueprint invests in sea level rise protections, retrofits homes, and protects our natural and agricultural lands from development. Ultimately, these strategies can work together as a package to make our communities more resilient and equitable in the years ahead. And if you'd like to learn more about the specifics of each strategy, check out our website for a convenient booklet describing them. Today's event is not the first time we've done public engagement for Plan Bay Area 2050. In fact, in fall 2019, one of our prior rounds of outreach, we got nearly 13,000 comments from pop-up workshops in all 9 counties, as well as through an online tool known as the Mayor of Bayville. We are pleased to see the amount of support for taking bold actions to make the Bay Area a better place for future generations. 90% of the comments we received at that time were supportive of the strategies integrated into the draft blueprint. We know your feedback today will help us further improve the final blueprint slated for release this fall, and it's a great opportunity to focus strategies more directly on the needs of the post-COVID era. Let's talk a little bit about the draft blueprint and what it means in terms of outcomes. Combined, the 25 strategies make significant progress on some key regional issues. Of course, they don't solve all of our region's problems, and that's why we're gathering you here today for this workshop so we can move the needle even further. Starting with some housing outcomes, one notable highlight is that the draft blueprint's housing and transportation strategies would enable us to start reversing the decade-long trend of rising unaffordability in the Bay Area. As of 2015, the average Bay Area household spent 57% of their household income on housing and transportation. But by enabling more housing growth near transit and in communities with well-resourced schools, we're projecting a forecasted reduction of about 9 percentage points to 48% of household income by 2050. This reduction is even greater for low-income households, thanks to a significant number of permanently affordable new homes that are called deed-restricted affordable housing. as well as through income-based discounts on tolls and transit fares. Funding in the draft blueprint enables the construction of over 400,000 permanently affordable homes, leading to those greater affordability benefits for those who are least able to afford the Bay Area's high housing costs. Furthermore, a lot of this new growth is focused in walkable communities with frequent nearby transit service, which enables more people to walk, bike, and take transit. By 2050, we forecast that 43% of Bay Area households would be able to walk to a high-frequency public transit line with service of 15 minutes or better. Next slide. On the environmental front, there's some more highlights here. Investing in bicycle infrastructure and reducing speed limits, things that were discussed in the video earlier, could save more than 1,500 lives over the next 30 years. And while this is certainly not enough to get to zero fatalities by 2050, it is a meaningful step forward to address casualties on our region's road system. With regards to hazards, things like earthquake and sea level rise, retrofitting homes, as well as building seawalls, levees, and other natural infrastructure such as wetland restoration, can protect 100% of all homes at high risk of damage in an earthquake, as well as 98% of all homes threatened by sea level rise over the next 30 years. And lastly, despite the significant tax increases that would be required to pay for many of these strategies, tax increases that would primarily affect businesses and higher income individuals, that we're seeing that Bay Area businesses remain positioned for further growth in the decades ahead, even as we face a major recession today. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Michael Germerod, who will walk through some additional outcomes of the analysis.
All right, let's dig into some of the details related to the draft blueprint. The Bay Area is expected to grow by 2.7 million people and 1.4 million new jobs over the planning time horizon. To ensure that this additional growth does not lead to continued increases in housing costs, it is essential that we produce enough affordable housing to meet this demand, as well as to address overcrowding and displacement that we see today. For some households, this means market rate construction, and for others, we need to have public subsidies to ensure rent or mortgage is within reach. To do this, the draft blueprint includes 1.5 million new housing units, including over 400,000 permanently protected for the lowest income households. Importantly, the draft blueprint includes one new home for every one new job. This slide shows where that growth might occur with the strategies included in the draft blueprint. You can see on the left side that 41% of all new housing growth is forecasted for Santa Clara County, the heart of Silicon Valley. Also, 27% of the growth is being forecasted for the East Bay and 20% for San Francisco and the Peninsula. The North Bay continues to have relatively limited growth. Approximately 14% of all new housing units would be located in the North Bay. On the right side, you can see a breakdown of job growth. The trend here also rather similar, with a significant proportion, 44% of all new jobs located in Silicon Valley, with continued clustering in the region's largest job center. Growth is more limited in other parts of the region, but there's also significant growth in Alameda County, San Francisco County, and San Mateo County. Important, 70% of the housing growth is located in areas within a half-mile of frequent transit, and 50% of all new jobs are located in those areas as well. As noted earlier, this is why much of the region's growth is focused in walkable places near public transportation. The draft blueprint also includes a breakdown of where growth might occur on a more localized level, as you can see here for Marin County. In the draft blueprint, new homes cluster around rail and ferry terminals in existing downtowns and aging malls transformed into new communities. The housing growth that is projected in Marin occurs fairly evenly between southern, central, and northern communities in the county. As the county with the highest share of retirees, Marin is actually projected to experience an overall reduction in jobs by 2050, as employment moves closer to places with significant growth in working age households and as storefront retail jobs decline. Ultimately, this growth pattern would provide Bay Area residents more choices in terms of transportation. We anticipate 17%, or roughly 1 in 5 Bay Area workers, would change their commuting pattern as a result. On the left, you can see the conditions today, and on the right, you can see what we project for the 2050 blueprint. In addition to significant growth in telecommuting, we also see more Bay Area residents choosing to walk, bicycle, or take public transit thanks to investments in bicycle infrastructure, transit infrastructure, and additional density near transit stations. We know that climate change is creating huge challenges for our region as it is bounded by water on all sides. Plan Bay Area 2050 is the first regional long-range plan that integrates sea level rise projections to make sure that communities are not flooded due to sea level rise. On the left, you can see a breakdown of the number of units at risk from sea level rise and also the share of those units that are protected by the Adapt to Sea Level Rise strategy. Most notably, San Francisco, Marin, San Mateo, and Santa Clara counties all have large numbers of housing units at risk due to sea level rise. But in those counties, as well as most others in the Bay Area, a system of levees, horizontal levees, and marsh adaptations and other sorts of environmental projects could ensure that nearly all the homes in those communities are protected from flooding. In total, the adaptation investments in the draft blueprint protect 89,000 homes from flooding, with just 2,000 homes still at risk. The measures also protect 166,000 job sites, with just 10,000 jobs unprotected. Finally, the strategy also includes 100,000 acres of marsh restoration and adaptation, as well as protections or elevations of all major highway and rail corridors through 2050. So, what does this mean for Marin County in terms of infrastructure investment? Some of the large investments in transportation would include the I-580 US 101 direct connector, frequency improvements on Golden Gate Transit buses and ferries, and a parking garage at the Larkspur Ferry Terminal to support those increased frequency improvements. Investments in sea level rise adaptation would ensure low-lying sections of highway would be protected through Marin County, as well as low-lying communities like San Rafael that are invested in to adapt to sea level rise. Within the county, there are many opportunities to advance marsh restoration as a way to help protect communities and ensure this vital ecosystem adapts with the rising seas too. While we make a lot of progress in the draft blueprint advancing equity, improving affordability, and protecting the Bay Area's environment, we're still falling short on one central environmental goal: addressing climate change. Plan Bay Area 2050 is required by state law to include strategies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by at least 19% per person by the year 2035. From tolling the region's freeways to enabling more growth near BART stations and more, the draft blueprint strategies we've showcased today move the needle quite a bit. We estimate that they could yield up to 12 percentage point reduction as a result of the strategies combined, but the state target is 19 percentage points. This means that the remaining gap of roughly 7 percentage points will need new or expanded strategies in the final blueprint to close that gap. So for now, I'm going to turn it back to Leslie, who will help us identify any clarifying questions we may have received so far. Leslie?
Thank you, Michael and Dave. Okay, sorry, just getting back into my document here. Okay, we'll answer any clarifying questions. As Michael just said, I'd like to introduce our additional staff members who will be managing the Q&A. First, my public engagement colleague, Ursula Vogler, will run the question and answer period, and Adam Nolting and Paul Fassinger from our regional planning section will join Dave and Michael to answer your questions. So if you haven't already, please type your questions into the Q&A box and the planners will answer the questions. As a reminder, for those of you joining us by phone only, you will not be able to ask a question as part of this meeting. Jot your questions down now, and after the workshop, you can call our comment line at 415-778-2292 and leave us a message there with your questions.
Okay, great. Thanks, Leslie. If I could have all the planners turn their cameras on, that would be great. And we have a few questions, so I'll start right off. First question, since we're working on the future of Marin County, I'd like to ask this pressing question. What interventions can Marin County do so that it can finally get more rail and transit services? I'd love to leave a legacy of BART to the North Bay, especially we have been shortchanged from the rest of the region due to our historically suburban stance. And I'd like to see potentially smart service south of Larkspur that will use old right-of-way too. So I guess the question is, what interventions can Marin County do so that it can finally get more rail and transit services?
For this question, I'm going to turn it over to Adam Nolting, one of our lead transportation planners.
Thanks, Dave. It's a great question. I think this is an opportunity to highlight some of the activities that we did that led into the Plan Berry 2050 analysis. One of those was a request to the region to come up with transformative project ideas to submit to MTC and ABAG staff to analyze and kind of understand the potential benefits. And it gave an opportunity for residents around the region as well as public agencies to come up with all sorts of different ideas that may not have been looked at in previous plans. Some of the ideas were similar to some of the notions you identified by providing new transit service to Marin County. We looked at such things as a rail extension from the current alignment near Novato to Solano County that would kind of parallel the SR 37 corridor. We also looked at smart or a rail service across the Richmond-San Rafael Bridge or a rebuilt bridge that would connect into the BART system. We also looked at other things such as like bus rapid transit along these corridors and that would cross the region's toll bridges. So we looked at a number of different things through the Horizon effort. They gave us an opportunity to do so. And we did this through a project performance assessment, which allowed us to understand the benefits as well as understand the costs that go along with these projects. And some of our findings really found that their estimated costs often do exceed their forecasted benefits, but it's an opportunity in the future to continue looking at some of these projects, but it may require some rethinking of ways to reduce cost, make the projects more equitable, and ways to make these new modes more attractive to existing residents, which could focus on things of eased access to the different modes of transport, which ultimately could increase their benefits. So it was a great opportunity, and I would really like to point to you to the Horizon website that has some more information on these projects that we analyzed if you'd like to learn more about their benefits and potential costs.
Thanks, Adam. And you can learn more about the Horizon Initiative at MTC's website at mtc.ca.gov. Okay, thank you. Next question. Here in Marin, we are an aging population. Many like me are dependent or will be on Social Security. I live in one of 20% of mobile home parks in Marin, Larkspur, that are not covered with rent protections. Many seniors in Larkspur, about 48%, live in totally unregulated rental housing. This year, my rent is going up $75 per month. My Social Security benefit went up $20. How is this sustainable?
Kevin, thank you for your question. And I really appreciate it because it points out some of the challenges that all too many Bay Area residents face. And oftentimes our senior population, like other populations in the Bay Area, is being displaced to other parts of California or other parts of the country. And we'd like this region to remain an inclusive place for folks of all ages, all incomes, all races. With regards to the draft blueprint and Plan Bay Area 2050, one of the key strategies to address challenges like yours is an expanded set of protections for renters in the Bay Area. One of the housing strategies that we've included goes beyond the recent state actions on renter protections to really expand a package of protections similar to those in San Francisco to all 9 counties of the Bay Area. And that does have meaningful near-term benefits for folks like yourself, as well as thousands of others across the region. So that is one action that we've included in this plan to tackle that challenge.
Okay, thank you, Dave. I believe this is a question for Michael. How will low-lying areas of San Rafael specifically be protected from sea level rise by the plan?
Sure, great question, and I'm glad we got it. So the sea level rise strategy in Plan Bay Area did 3 things. First, we partnered with BCDC to identify where overtopping and flooding occurred. We then used local plans where they existed, or San Francisco Estuary Institute document, the Adaptation Atlas, to understand possible adaptation solutions for those areas. We also worked with a consultant to develop high-level cost estimates for possible solutions like seawalls or more environmentally friendly solutions like ecotone horizontal levees. The regional level analysis gave us a high-level cost of what we may need to start adaptation in the region. So Plan Bay Area sea level rise analysis is meant to characterize a regional challenge and lift up a need for local advanced adaptation planning, where kind of the details of should it be a seawall, should it be a levee, should it be land use based, what are the local solutions? Those are things that will have to be worked out through a local planning process.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Next question. Have you collected data on the reduction of GHG emissions between March and July, I guess after we were in shelter in place?
So I'll tackle this question. There are a number of different private data sources that are publicly available on the web that showcase the reduction in miles traveled across counties in California and across the United States, which gives us a good sense of the GHG benefits of reduced travel during the shelter-in-place period. So there is very useful data on that front. However, we've also seen that as restrictions have been loosened in recent months and public transit, there's continued concerns about the safety of public transit for many residents, that driving has rebounded in recent weeks and months. And so there may be major challenges with regards to a rebound in greenhouse gas emissions as we move into the summer and fall. So I encourage you to check out some of those resources online.
Thanks, Dave. I believe this is a question for Adam. Is the 19% greenhouse gas emission reduction goal a goal of Plan Bay 2050 or a state mandate?
Yeah, that's a great question. To clarify, it is a state mandate. It is a 19% reduction goal to reduce greenhouse gas emissions for passenger vehicles on our roadways, and that's relative to 2005 greenhouse gas emission levels. It's a mandate set by the state, and it's through the California Air Resources Board. And it's commonly, the reference we often put out there is SB 375, and this is where those mandates and those targets are being set.
Wonderful, thank you. I'm going to continue with the questions and I'll save the comments for the end. Next question. You identify plans for growth, but for the past 10 years, the California growth rate has declined. Last year, more than 200,000 residents left. We're losing at least one congressional seat. So what is the basis of your growth projections, and how do you explain the assumption of providing one new home per job? Maybe a question for Paul or Dave.
Sure, thanks. We use a pretty detailed model to produce growth projections for the regional forecasting used in the draft plan. There's detailed information about birth rates, death rates, migration trends over time, so that all that information is considered. While it may be the case that there has been a slowing in growth in California, and that is true, our forecast, the base forecast, is lower than the forecast we've used in previous plans. So we've recognized that, but still at the same time, we see growth in the long term for the Bay Area, often really driven by the economic engine that is the Bay Area, so that matching housing units to the number of jobs is really a policy that we are pursuing to try to address the difficult housing issues, the housing crisis that we've seen in the Bay Area over a long period of time. So it's not that we're just trying to house the additional people coming into the Bay Area, but The plan is trying to address housing issues that are already here: overcrowding, overpayment, the difficulty that families have with these economic issues. And so we've taken the data that you've described into account, but what we're really trying to do is address some existing and continuing problems for the region.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Next question, I think, is for Michael. Is future wildfire risk in the region, especially Marin, and smoke harm addressed?
Yeah, so we've integrated wildfire directly into the plan in two different ways. The first is the areas identified for future growth that Dave went over earlier in the presentation, used CAL FIRE's regulatory fire hazard severity zones, areas that otherwise would have been identified as a good place for future growth that had that very high fire hazard risk were removed. Second, we have a draft blueprint strategy to modernize existing buildings. A new building that is built today in an area with very high fire hazard risk needs to be built to improved standards. But many buildings built before this 2009 code don't have the same safety. So the strategy creates incentives for homeowners to go in and make those types of improvements to roofing, siding, that's going to make their homes, more fire resistant in the case of a fire. That strategy also has improvements for drought, energy, as well as seismic improvements.
Thank you, Michael. Next question. In your beginning overview, you mentioned increasing wages in the category of economy. How will Plan Bay Area 2050 increase wages? Maybe Dave?
Certainly, that's a great question. So just to clarify, earlier we mentioned that the plan seeks to improve economic mobility, enabling folks who might be lower income to move into the middle class. There are a few strategies that we've incorporated on this front, but they aren't moving the needle far enough. We would like to make much more progress on income inequality, which means action on the national and state and regional levels to do this. So a few of the things that we have included are things like childcare subsidies for lower income residents. This enables them to continue to work or go to school as they start to have a family, and that can be really critical to find a pathway to the middle class. Another example in the draft blueprint is the small business incubator programs to basically give a leg up to those folks in economically disadvantaged communities to be able to start a small business, grow that small business, and again, find that pathway to the middle class as well. So those are a few examples, but we're looking for more input today on how to further strengthen that.
Okay, thank you, Dave. Next question. To get to meaningful equity requires capacity to acquire assets. What's being done to support home ownership? Maybe Dave.
Well, the draft blueprint includes a large increase in deed-restricted affordable housing. Now, sometimes that can be rental housing, but it also can be housing available for purchase. By making it deed-restricted and by subsidizing that housing, it's possible to make those units lower the barrier to entry for lower-income households. And oftentimes, those sorts of units are the price is really reflective of the income bracket it's targeting. So that is one way, by creating a lot more units available at lower thresholds, but we're obviously open to other suggestions to grow home ownership, so that way everyone can be included in the region's housing market.
Okay, we have one more question, and then I will read the comments, maybe an abbreviated version of them. So the last question we have is, pre-COVID, SMART was expensive and had low ridership and had relatively low frequency of stops compared to other transit in Bay Area. As a diesel train, it also did not meet greenhouse gas emission reduction goals. Some rail stations, Civic Center for one, are highly underutilized. If housing near jobs is a goal, how are GHG goals in Plan Bay Area 2050 met if housing increases by 2% in Marin, but jobs decrease and transit will not be able to efficiently and cost effectively accommodate plans' population growth?
So that's a great question. In part, the focus on growing near transit can help to also grow the ridership of our existing transit systems, which can make them more effective means to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And so by clustering new housing growth in some of those station areas you're mentioning that, as you note, are sometimes underutilized, it can create opportunities for someone to live near that Marin Civic Center smart station and take the train down to the ferry and take the ferry to their job in San Francisco, perhaps. And that can take the car off the road and reduce emissions. So those are some ways that the plan's focused growth land use strategy can encourage more non-automobile trips and bring emissions down.
Okay, thank you. We do have one more question before I read the comments. How does the plan address K through 12 education equity given differences in localities?
That is a great question. And perhaps in future iterations of Plan Bay Area, there will be additional elements on things like schools or public safety, things that are often found in city general plans. Plan Bay Area 2050 does not have an education element per se, but what we are doing is making sure our growth pattern is more distributed across the region, so there's more growth in places with the highest resource schools today. And that can help work to rebalance the disparities that exist between our different school districts. But I think you bring up a great point, which is that education is another means to advance equity, and certainly that is something that should be discussed in the region in the years ahead.
Okay, thank you everyone for those great questions. I'm just gonna read abbreviated versions of the comments. First comment by Mark. I recommend elevated ultralight-weight bidirectional automated group rapid transit, which can be suspended from the Golden Gate Bridge and can form a network throughout Marin and surrounding counties at a far lower cost than with conventional construction techniques. So there's more to that question, but thank you, Mark. Another comment from Mark, there is a high likelihood of sea level rise greater than 2 feet. The same construction used for the group rapid transit we recommend is able to raise highways, turn them into viaducts at less cost than relocating them. Another comment, okay, we read this. Another job creation strategy is to augment the small business incubator program with a systemic approach to making the entire economy far more sustainable. This can be fostered with maker spaces at the high school level, as well as the planned rollout across the community college system. So I think those are all of the comments. Yes, thank you so much, everyone. We will have a time for Q&A toward the end of the workshop. So thank you so much. We're going to keep the interactive element going. We're going to use our polling software that we used at the start of the meeting, and Dave and Michael will remind us now how to use it, and will walk us through the questions. So Dave and Michael.
Thank you, Ursula. Okay, now we're ready for my favorite part of today's workshop, where we're going to hear from you about how to solve some of the big challenges remaining for the final blueprint. We'd like you to share your feedback on what we call the 5 big challenges with the blueprint strategies. So to participate, go to pollev.com/MTCABAG302 on your phones or web browsers. We're going to go through the questions one by one. Or on your cell phone, you can send a text message to 22333, and in the body of the message, you'll want to type AMTCABAG302 and then hit send. Since the question will not show up on your phone, we will read the question aloud, and the answer choices for you will show, and the answer choices for you to answer that question as well. All right, so let's get started. Question number 1, our first challenge today is related to affordable housing. In the draft blueprint, we integrated the following key strategies: allowing a greater mix of housing types and densities in growth areas, funding affordable housing protection, preservation, and production, and requiring developers to build more affordable units. And yet, despite these strategies, in the draft blueprint, there are still hundreds of thousands of low-income households without those protections. So our challenge is, how do we create more permanently affordable housing, especially in areas with well-resourced schools, amenities, and transportation options? So now it's time for your voice to be heard. Here's the question. Identify which of these potential strategies should be included in the final blueprint to make the Bay Area's affordable housing even better. Option A, invest in constructing more affordable housing units. Option B, accelerate redevelopment of aging malls and office parks with significant shares of affordable housing. Option C, expand capacity for new housing in communities with well-resourced schools and good access to jobs. Option D, advance innovative approaches for reducing housing construction and financing costs. And option E, none of the above. There will be an opportunity on the next slide to type in your own answers, and the options presented here are just some pre-selected choices to think about. You can select as many as you'd like, and in order to do this via text, you can send your answers as different or individual text messages on the same thread. So Michael, what are we seeing here in the results?
Well, early on, it looked like there was pretty even support, but it looks like, investing in constructing more affordable housing units as well as the acceleration of redevelopment of malls and office parks are the two that are getting the greatest support. I will mention that both A and B are strategies exist in the draft blueprint, and so it's great to see that there's support for those. And maybe there's a consideration that we emphasize those more as we get to the final blueprint. What are you seeing, Dave?
Yeah, Michael, I think that point's really valid. The A and B would really be a doubling down on some of those existing strategies to make even more headway. We wanted to, noticing the support for option B here, we've seen that as a very popular strategy in all 9 counties of the region throughout our outreach. There's so many, mid-20th century malls, strip malls and the like that are just starting to show their age a bit. And there's some real opportunities there to redevelop those in a way that creates some win-win opportunities both for housing and for future retail. Looks like there's a little bit less support here for expanding housing in those areas with well-resourced schools and good access to jobs. And then it looks like maybe one individual supports none of the above. I think we're ready to move on, but if any of you want to type in a few last thoughts here. Okay, so now it's time for you to give us feedback on other options. Is there anything else, any other strategies we should consider to address the challenge related to affordable housing?
Yeah, and it's probably going to take folks a few seconds or a minute to get a comment up there. And so during this time, I thought I'd just share a little of what we've heard. Back at the kind of end of June, we did some, virtual focus group meetings with historically disadvantaged communities in the region. And members of that community shared that the affordable housing challenge isn't just about having the units in place. There's a lot of work that's needed to ensure that folks can access that affordable housing that's built. And so whether that's making sure that, the process is understood in languages other than English, or that, certain statuses like a student may not be able to apply for certain programs. And so working through to make sure those limitations aren't ones that lead to people not being able to access that type of housing. The other thing that we've heard is, I think it reflects a comment that was shared earlier in terms of not just getting folks into affordable rental housing, but are there also ways to kind of increase the opportunities for home ownership for a broader set of residents? What are we seeing here in the comments, Dave?
Well, I'm seeing some great comments come in here. I think one person brings up rent control, which, as I noted earlier, is one of the key strategies in the draft blueprint, but also, suggestions of things like boosting the minimum wage as a way to address the income side of the affordability topic. So not just reducing housing prices, but actually making sure that incomes are growing at a faster rate. Also a comment here, I think that's really useful, supporting aging in place. There's going to be a need to retrofit homes, especially in a place like Marin County, where it's already more than 10 years older on average than other Bay Area counties. And that may even continue to worsen in decades ahead.
Yeah, it looks like there's a few comments that really blend some of what we've, strategies that are already in the blueprint. Things like encourage cities to upzone more residential tracts in that mixed use zone along major corridors. That's something that we were discussing a little bit earlier with, major transit stations seeing more housing growth over the next 30 years. And then this comment here on financing for acquisition and preservation of affordable housing. Currently a draft blueprint strategy designed to increase the kind of amount of money available to the region to just build new affordable housing. Includes a preservation element, ensuring that those units that maybe have certain tax subsidies that are going to sunset over the next few years, that folks can get in and make sure that they remain affordable, so we're not making it harder on ourselves.
I'm seeing a few other great comments here, Michael. Things like addressing Proposition 13. Obviously, that's been a long-standing topic of policy conversation in California. But also in these, seeing a few comments about incentives for empty nesters to leave their typically larger homes, and oftentimes that sort of has been incentivized by Proposition 13, whereas there may be a win-win opportunity there for those empty nesters to get a newer but smaller unit that's more appropriate for the phase of life they're in, and open up those homes for folks who have younger kids or families and need the space. So I think with that, we're ready to move on to the challenge number 2. So feel free to type in your final thoughts, press send, and in a couple seconds, we're going to move on to the next topic.
All right, so as Dave mentioned, we've got 5 challenges. And so the first one we focused on was housing and affordability. The second challenge is congestion and crowding. In the draft blueprint, there were a number of strategies designed to try and reduce congestion and crowding. A number of strategies advanced high ridership transit projects. Another strategy reformed regional transit fare policy. And then on the highway front, there were per mile tolling on congested freeways with transit alternatives. So not every freeway was assumed to be tolled in the draft blueprint, just those with a high frequency transit alternative. Despite those investments and policies, traffic congestion and transit overcrowding continued to worsen in many freeway corridors and on many transit systems. So the challenge that we're posing to all of you is, how can new or expanded strategies alleviate traffic congestion on suburban highways and reduce overcrowding on bus and rail lines? So we're going to go ahead and do the exact same kind of two phases here. First, we want to hear your feedback on kind of a multiple choice question, and then we'll open it up for more free response. So again, the question is, please identify which of these potential strategies should be included in the final blueprint to alleviate traffic congestion and reduce overcrowding on transit in the Bay Area. So you can select as many of these options as you like. For those on the phone, I'm just going to read off your options. If you think implementing all lane tolling on high traffic freeways with transit alternatives is a good idea, press A. Invest more in world-class bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure to make it easier to reach local destinations without a car, B. If you believe building more express lanes with robust express bus service is a great idea, that's C. Redesigning public transit systems to provide more seamless transfers and focus service on high frequency routes, that's D. Extending regional rail services to new communities and increase the frequency of service, that's E. Widen highways and expand interchanges to yield short-term congestion relief, that would be F. And if none of those strategies are resonating with you, then you can go ahead and type in G and text that to us. So Dave, looks like we've already gotten most of the responses. Things have settled in. What do we have?
Well, options C and D are really popping to the top here. Certainly a lot of support for express lanes. Those are carpool lanes that single occupant drivers can pay to use, along with robust express bus service. You know, there aren't any express lanes in Marin County right now, but maybe that's something that should be considered in the future. Another strategy under consideration here is redesigning our public transit systems to provide more seamless transfers and focus on those high frequency routes. And I think that really is an area where there's some opportunity to improve the hubs in Marin County, places like the San Rafael Transit Center, and make sure that it's even better than today, even more seamless experience. You see anything else here in the data, Michael?
Just looks like the support for kind of bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure has also got quite a bit of support. But why don't we go ahead and move to the next slide where folks can add kind of a free response to this same question. So is there anything else we should take into consideration to address the challenge of congestion and transit crowding? So go ahead and type in your ideas.
So we already got someone who's posted in here, explore ferries. We certainly have explored ferries, and there's some improvements under consideration for the final blueprint to increase frequency of ferry service on the Golden Gate from Larkspur to San Francisco. Obviously a key connection there, and with the extension of the SMART train to Larkspur, that's kind of provides connections throughout Marin County. We'll see if we get some other comments in here, just the one at the moment. Michael, what have we been hearing from some of our communities and focus groups to date?
Let's see, I can pull that up in a second here. So one of the things that we've heard from our community-based organization focus groups is that it isn't all about the big ticket items, these major investments in transit or highways. It's also some of the smaller things of just making sure that the elevators are functional and folks can access infrastructure that's already there and that clean and safe. I think with COVID-19, there's, folks probably had comments on cleanliness and safety prior to COVID, but I think that has only been heightened recently. Also things as simple as just making sure, lines, marking a crosswalk are nice and bolded and clear is something that folks wanted to see in those focus. It looks like we've got a lot of
jump in. Yeah, I was just going to jump in. It looks like we're getting a lot of great comments live right now. One set of comments I've seen, comments about the regressive nature of tolling. That is a great point, and that's one of the reasons why the draft blueprint includes the first ever income-based discounts for tolling across the Bay Area. So lower income residents would get 2/3 off tolls to make sure that those sorts of impacts are minimized. That's certainly a major area of concern. Tolling can be a really great way to help yield long-term congestion relief, but we need to do it in an equitable and affordable manner. Also seeing some good feedback on the specifics of carpool facilities, interest in telecommuting. Obviously, that has done a lot for our freeways, and that is an area where we're assuming continued growth. But I think the question is really how do we maintain some of the high levels of telecommuting under COVID going forward and encourage businesses to make permanent some of the policies of today. Michael, what else are you seeing in the comments?
Yeah, there's a lot of ideas here. I'm just going to read off a few of the comments so that we highlight them. I know for folks, the text might be a little bit small, so I just want to read off some of them. An idea to avoid duplication, for example, SMART sold as relieving congestion on 101, but duplicate bus service, express lanes for buses, cheaper solutions. Another comment here, create incentive for industry and jobs to locate in less populated and less congested areas, essentially creating new job and population centers. Actually, our fifth question, that question of the jobs housing balance and solutions for that challenge. Are you seeing another big here, Dave?
Yeah, I'm seeing a comment come in here from Mark about elevated group rapid transit. Just want to acknowledge that and note that in the final blueprint, we're exploring the region's first group rapid transit line on the Dumbarton corridor between Alameda and San Mateo counties. So that will be a great opportunity to explore the feasibility and efficacy of that type of technology.
It looks like, we have a comment here that kind of builds on what I was sharing from some of our focus groups: aesthetic upgrades to the San Rafael Transit Center. It's pretty depressing and unappealing. So, that's a comment that we've heard a few places on. Maybe we have the bones of what we need, and there's a lot that could be done to just make sure that kind of the assets and infrastructure that we have in place is maintained well. And maybe there's some opportunity to kind of, spruce it up and make it more attractive to folks. Bring back school buses. In Marin County, 25% of our traffic is generated by parents driving their kids to school. Another commenter really liked that and mentioned that right above.
We sure got a lot of transportation comments this morning. Looks like we have some real transportation folks who are real interested in that topic. I think we might want to move on to the next topic, though, Michael.
Sounds good.
All right, so type in any last thoughts here, and now we're moving on to challenge number 3. So our third challenge for the final blueprint is really with regards to some of the displacement and gentrification concerns. So in the draft blueprint, we included much stronger renter protections going beyond state legislation and existing local strategies, reduced barriers for housing near transit and in areas of high opportunity to create more affordable units in those key geographies, and expanding childcare support to help on the income side of that affordability equation for low-income families. So having children doesn't necessarily mean being displaced or priced out of your community. And yet, the risk of displacement in many Bay Area communities, even with these strategies, continues to grow over time. So here's the challenge. How can we further ensure that low-income residents and communities of color are not ultimately displaced to areas with limited access to opportunity? So now it's your turn to weigh in on some ideas here. So help us identify which strategies should be expanded or added in the final blueprint to address displacement. Press A to expand investment in the preservation of permanently affordable housing in communities facing displacement. Press B to ensure ample affordable housing is built in communities most at risk of displacement, to really provide those housing opportunities in those communities. Press C to implement workforce training programs to grow the middle class and make it easier to stay in place. If you have more income available, you may be able to stay in your community more easily. And press D to dedicate and protect ample investment in schools, parks, and transit to improve quality of life in the communities where many of those displaced residents are moving, really trying to provide more opportunity in those communities where displacees are going. And press E if none of these strategies are appealing to you. So Michael, what are we seeing in the initial results?
Well, it looks like support for expanded investment and permanently affordable, deed-restricted housing, option A, is getting the most support. And I'll just mention that, it's expensive to build affordable housing, as I think a lot of people probably in this workshop are aware of. And but when it's deed restricted, it's a unit that exists for a low-income household in perpetuity, and so it's just a strategy that ensures that there's a low-income household living in those units out into the future, whereas other strategies might ensure stability in a shorter term. I think the deed restricted strategy provides a much longer-term solution to keeping lower-income households in communities.
Yeah, and I would add to that, Michael, the strong support for option A, that actually is the comparably affordable strategy compared to building a lot of new units. Preserving units can often be done at a lower cost, which is, really enables more bang per buck in terms of addressing the challenge. I'm seeing there's also pretty strong support for some of the other ideas here, including the workforce training programs to grow the middle class. That's something that's not in the draft blueprint right now, but I think maybe takes on greater emphasis in this COVID recession period we're in right now. Let's go to the next part of the question, where you can give us some additional feedback. So what else should we take into consideration? What other strategies might be appropriate to address the displacement crisis in the Bay Area? So type in those ideas now. And I'd like to turn to Michael to see if there's any feedback we've gotten from the focus groups we've done on these topics.
Yeah, so the really two that stood out were really focused on making sure that folks with a poor credit history have a means to rent in their community, and also that there's access to legal support to make sure renters are aware of their rights and kind of have a tool to make sure that if there is an unfair process at hand, they have a tool in hand that they can remain in the community. So those were two comments that we heard in focus groups from communities that have experienced displacement.
So seeing some initial comments come in here, ensuring that communities at risk of displacement are given a seat at the table in making those decisions. That is a great comment. That is part of the reason why we did these focus groups in communities that often have high risk of displacement, to hear directly from them on what strategies should be considered. But I think it just really points out the importance of equity and inclusion in decision-making processes overall. So thank you so much for that really important comment. Also, seeing a comment about protecting naturally occurring affordable housing. Obviously, naturally occurring affordable housing can sometimes become unaffordable over time unless it's protected. And so that's a useful comment and something we are considering as part of that preservation strategy. Michael, are you seeing some other feedback here?
Yeah, it looks like the third and fourth comment are trying to tackle the challenge from the income side. And so ensuring that there's those high school vocational programs, maybe providing a pathway to a middle-class job and a middle-class wage. And also just a call out for increasing the minimum wage so that if someone's working a full-time job, they can afford housing. They have a better shot at affording housing, particularly those in those high resource areas. Acknowledging that could be tricky, would require some state law work, but tackling it from the income side.
And I guess I'll read out one or two more comments, and then those of you who are still putting in your feedback, we'll probably move on in the next minute or so. But I see a great comment here about a lot of the strategies on the state level have created more market rate housing than lower income housing. That's certainly a key challenge, and that's why the draft blueprint not only includes higher levels of inclusionary zoning, but also this direct public investment to build more affordable homes. And it will take large amounts of money to actually be able to construct that much needed affordable housing. And whether that's done at the more local level or the county level or the regional level, or even at the state level with new funding sources, it's going to require dollars. And so that's going to be something that's going to need to be talked about in the years ahead if we want to make sure our region remains inclusive. Seeing a few more comments pop up here, Silicon Valley contributions, so basically tech companies contributing to housing. There's been some limited contributions from tech companies to date, but I would think we certainly would agree that there needs to be more involvement from the private sector on this regional crisis going forward.
Yeah, and someone made the comment that I wish there were more folks at this workshop, and coming up after we get through these slides, there are more ways that you and your neighbors and colleagues and friends can provide comments. And so today's just one way that folks can provide comments. So if Saturday morning wasn't the right opportunity, there's more coming. So just stick with us and we'll be sure that you're aware of other ways that you can get the word out to provide input into the Plan Bay Area process.
I think Michael will move on to challenge 4, so I'll turn it back over to you.
Sounds great. All right, so 4 of 5 is all about greenhouse gas emissions, a key goal, a regulatory goal for Plan Bay Area 2050. Already in the draft blueprint, there are strategies to implement per mile tolling on congested freeways with transit alternatives, strategies to build complete street networks and implement reduced speed limits. So complete streets have, bike and pedestrian infrastructure, and then allowing a greater mix of housing types and densities near frequent transit. Despite these improvements that are included in the draft blueprint, we're only getting roughly halfway to our emission reduction goal. So the question we're posing to you is, how do we further reduce transportation-related greenhouse gas emissions to reach critical climate goals? So again, this is going to follow the same format. We'd like you to identify which of these potential strategies should be included in the final blueprint to reduce climate emissions in the Bay Area. So if you're using your phone to get these answers in, you can text A to show support for expanding electric vehicle and charging infrastructure subsidies, especially for lower income households. B would support postponing highway widening projects until a greater share of vehicles are electric. C would support charging parking fees to disincentivize driving, putting fees towards bicycle giveaways and free shuttles. And then D would require employers to implement mandatory work from home policies 2 or 3 days per week. And then if none of those ideas are resonating with you, you can go ahead and text E to say none of the above. So Dave, it looks like kind of broad support for a lot of things, although not so much the postpone highway widening projects until a greater share of vehicles are electric. What are you thinking?
Well, certainly electric vehicles are a key part of the strategies here, and something that we'll be considering carefully in the final blueprint is whether to even double or triple or quadruple the amount of investment in electric vehicles to get us closer to this target. Also, surprised to see the strong support for parking fees, higher parking meter rates, stronger off-street parking requirements and the like. That would create a new revenue source, as noted here, for giving away free bikes, which can be a great way for those folks who might not have a bicycle, but may be physically able to bicycle to take advantage of our wonderful trail network envisioned in the plan.
So it looks like we've kind of reached everyone getting their vote in. So why don't we move to the next question? So here's your opportunity to share any idea, free response style. Is there anything else we should take into consideration to address climate emissions in the Bay Area? And I'll just mention that in those kind of focus groups that we had at the end of June, we received several comments making sure that all communities had access to parks and green space. I think, again, this is a comment that's only been heightened by people's lifestyles with COVID-19. So folks who maybe are in communities without great access to parks, making sure that the parks they do have access to are kind of well-maintained and funded, and possibly taking a closer look at where there might be some gaps in kind of the regional park network, so that all residents can have a place to recreate and get outside. Folks also wanted to make sure that the development that does happen includes amenities like community gardens or reliable and clean energy. So just making sure that as development happens, we're going ahead and making sure that that development is done in an environmentally friendly way, and has assets for those that live there as well as for the community to kind of take advantage of.
Michael, I'm seeing some initial comments coming in here. Definitely the first few commenters interested in things like bike share, scooter share, making sure that those are electric. So that's some really useful feedback. We know that there's, Marin County has often been a strong supporter of new bicycle infrastructure and trails, and some of the infrastructure that's been built over the years can really support electric bikes. Also seeing, one commenter is saying incentivize companies that build electric vehicles to build factories in the Bay Area. I think that's a nice kind of crossover between the environmental strategies we're talking about, but also the economic side of the plan, where the region doesn't have as strong of a manufacturing sector as other parts of the country. What else are you seeing here, Michael?
Well, there's one comment showing concern for the toll highways, and I just want to be clear that the strategy we explored in the blueprint is not on all lanes for all freeways. It's more limited than that, making sure that it's focused on areas that do have a good transit alternative, and that it's also a means-based toll, so that lower income households are not going to pay the same rate as a higher income household. So I just want to clarify that. But we do hear you that there's concern there, and I think that's concern shared in other portions of the region too.
Also seeing, Michael, a comment here about benefit cost analysis for different climate measures. And actually, I would encourage that commenter to go to mtc.ca.gov/horizon, and you can see the benefit cost analysis on many of the transportation actions to address climate change. Also seeing a great comment just came in, safe routes to school investments for more walking and biking. The draft blueprint includes 7,000 miles of protected bicycle infrastructure. So that means things like, barriers that protect the bicycle lanes from traffic. And that is just a much safer environment for small children to be using to bike to school. So that is something that we could consider expanding in the final blueprint.
I think there's this idea of also, more shared options for vehicles, including pickup trucks. So families maybe that currently have 2 or 3 vehicles can get down to 1 or 2. Reducing probably that need for parking is also, just the cost of maintaining that many vehicles for a household. So I think that's an interesting strategy for us to explore. We did explore kind of, in our analysis, shared trips, but most of that was through kind of more of that TNC, Uber, and Lyft rideshare. So I think kind of just the car share program where you're basically borrowing a car for a select point of time is an interesting idea that would have impacts on the number of trips, as well as maybe the type of vehicle that someone's using for the right trip, and then getting at parking as well.
And I guess I'll note one last comment here, and then maybe we should move on. I see one commenter said, pay people to not have a car. That's definitely a bold idea to try to encourage people to shed their vehicles and take other forms of transportation. And we know that folks who do have zero car households have a much smaller carbon footprint compared to those who do own gasoline powered cars. I think with that, we are probably ready to turn over to the final challenge of the day. All right, so it's time to talk about the economy. And our key challenge here going forward is the continued jobs housing imbalance in the Bay Area. In the draft blueprint, we tried to take some action to shift the location of jobs closer to major areas with large amounts of housing. So these are often places, particularly in the East Bay, but also portions of the North Bay that are housing-rich locations. We studied strategies to assess impact fees on new office developments to discourage them from clustering in places like Silicon Valley, retaining key industrial lands to keep jobs that exist in those places, and creating incubator programs to create new jobs. And yet, in general, those strategies were insufficient to encourage a more distributed jobs pattern in the region. Jobs continued to cluster in the draft blueprint in Silicon Valley and San Francisco, far from many residents. And although more folks would be telecommuting in the future, they may still need to journey to those job sites a few days a week. And so here's the challenge. If this is a key concern, how could more ambitious economic strategies be employed to shift jobs closer to those existing housing-rich communities? So let's go to the poll here. Which of these expanded or new strategies should be included in the final blueprint to address the jobs housing imbalance? Press A to increase fees to discourage development of new office parks in job-rich, auto-oriented communities. Press B to expand business incubator programs to create new small businesses in housing-rich communities. Press C to prohibit more construction of office buildings in communities that have many more jobs than homes. Press D to provide tax subsidies for employers to relocate middle-wage jobs closer to affordable housing. If none of these strategies are of interest, or if you feel like this challenge is not particularly significant, you can press E for none of the above. So Michael, what are our initial voting showing here?
Well, it looks like folks have support for the 4 strategies that we are exploring here. No one's chosen none of the above yet. And it looks like the business incubator program to create new small businesses in housing-rich communities is receiving the most support, but also kind of, thinking about how fees might be able to be used to discourage development of new office parks in areas that already have a number of jobs, particularly in auto-oriented communities. And then kind of on the inverse, tax subsidies to employers to relocate middle-wage jobs closer to affordable housing. So, trying to play with fees and incentives with employers to see if, jobs can't locate closer to where the housing is in the region.
Looks like maybe the area where there's the least support are kind of those strict prohibitions on new construction of office buildings in certain places. So as you said, Michael, definitely more on kind of the fees and incentives side than those sort of strict caps on new development. Let's move on to hear some other ideas that folks may have to address the jobs housing imbalance in the region. So what other suggestions do you have for us in terms of actions to try to address this jobs housing imbalance? While we're getting that in, I just wanted to highlight, part of this jobs housing imbalance challenge is not just those long commutes, but also the fiscal concerns of cities that are very housing rich. Oftentimes those tax revenues are flowing to these very job rich locations, whereas the workers who are working in those places live quite a ways away, and those funds aren't flowing back to their communities. So what thoughts are coming in here? We haven't received any responses yet, but let's look at some of the early ideas. I see a comment here about increasing the minimum wage. Certainly a good idea to help improve economic mobility. And also a comment about requiring employers to provide housing near the job site. That's something that has started to gain some traction down in Silicon Valley. Great comment there.
There's also been, as you mentioned, some employers are starting to really enter into that housing conversation. There's other employers that are starting, as I've heard, to offer incentives to employees to locate near their job, so that, folks aren't going to be taking a long commute, whether it's by car or walking and biking, just really reducing the distance.
I love this comment that just came in about this being so hard because the center of our metropolitan region is a body of water. That is a great point, and that is something our region has struggled with for decades. The bay is both a beautiful natural asset, but also a barrier and a challenge for so many issue areas. Seeing strong interest in promoting working from home, employer incentives, and restrictions to converting farmland to development, that is an existing environmental strategy in the draft blueprint. I'll give you another minute or so to put in feedback on the jobs housing imbalance question.
Yeah, we've got a good here that, the tech companies play a larger role than the impact they have had on recent congestion. Mentioning that since businesses and employers are virtually totally free to make their own decisions about where to locate individuals or not, the employers seem to always have. I think that's where kind of on that previous side, there's a few strategies that are exploring incentives or disincentives one way or the other to see might that be enough to shift where an employer can locate within the Bay Area region.
And Mike, I'll point out, it seems like there's some interest in incentives on today's event. that is something that's very common in other parts of the country, other states and places like Texas or Ohio. These are places that often provide, large tax credits for job creation. Less common here in California, just given due to the robust job growth we've seen, but maybe something that could be considered for our housing-rich parts of the region. So instead of relocating those jobs to Austin or Seattle, what about other parts of the Bay Area instead?
Yeah, I think, a number of these strategies, we are trying to explore, what is their, context during and post-COVID. And I think, the work from home is something that has received a lot of support and exploration recently, but also, someone's mentioning this idea of satellite offices as a possible solution. So I think it's going to be continuing to explore how businesses in the region do see themselves organizing. Do they have a central kind of main office or facility, or is it spread out over multiple, and kind of might there be 3 offices or 3 warehouses spread across the region rather than just a single one that may have existed before COVID? Great comment.
So we do need to wrap up this segment, but I just want to acknowledge we've gotten some great feedback from all of you in Marin County. Thank you for all these great comments. We're going to turn it over to one last poll question, and Michael's going to run you through that one.
Yeah, so this one should be relatively quick for folks. We're just asking which of the key challenges we highlighted in the presentation today is most urgent to be addressed in the final blueprint. And we're asking you to go ahead and pick your top 2. So housing unaffordability is A, congestion and crowding is B, displacement is C, climate emissions are D, and the jobs housing imbalance is E. So it looks like right out of the gate that housing unaffordability is receiving kind of the greatest emphasis, with the climate just behind, and congestion and crowding on highways and transit also receiving a few votes as well.
I'll just add to that, Michael, all across the region, we always see point A popping up as the #1 concern of Bay Area residents. So not surprised to see that this is an issue in Marin County as well. But also noting the interest in protecting our climate, and that is something that is a central part of our planning.
So I think it looks like we've got our comments here. I just want to again echo Dave's comments. Thank you all. It looks like everyone who kind of started at the beginning with us is still here, and we appreciate you being with us this morning to provide input. And I'm going to hand it back to Dave to just go over a few of our kind of important partner regional initiatives. So with Dave, take it away.
Thanks, Michael. So we're going to get to the Q&A session as quickly as possible here, but we just wanted to highlight a few initiatives. If you're not just interested in the next 30 years, but maybe you're interested in what's happening in the next 5, here are a few initiatives that you might want to check out. So let's start with transportation. With regards to transportation, a near-term initiative is the Transportation Improvement Program. This is an effort that reflects local, regional, state, and federal funding priorities and decisions. The key document that is the 4-year clearinghouse of Bay Area transportation projects and their funding information, focused on the next 4 years, the early years of Plan Bay Area 2050. As this graphic shows, MTC is always interested in new project ideas. These often get incorporated in our long-range plan, in this case, Plan Bay Area 2050. And then they enter the Transportation Improvement Program, which hones in on the next 4 years. We could move to the next slide, please. The projects in the Transportation Improvement Plan ultimately move forward towards construction and implementation. You'll see a breakdown of the 2019 Transportation Improvement Program expenditures and fund sources at the bottom, and we encourage you to check out the project website shown here to learn more. Next slide. If you're interested in near-term action on housing, we encourage you to check out the Regional Housing Needs Allocation Process, referred to by the acronym RHNA. Since 1969, the Association of Bay Area Governments works under state law with state and local governments to identify the amount of housing growth for cities, towns, and counties over the next 8 years. At the completion of the RHNA process, each local government updates their housing elements in zoning to show how they would accommodate their share of the regional housing need. For the upcoming cycle, the Bay Area will need to plan for over 441,000 new housing units over an 8-year time period, a key piece of the envisioned 1.5 million new homes by 2050. RHNA is well underway, but there are some key milestones in the months ahead. And we encourage you to check out the schedule shown here and note that by January of 2023, local housing elements in many Bay Area cities and towns will need to be updated. To learn more, go to abag.ca.gov. Lastly, if you're interested in near-term action on climate, as well as our rising sea levels, there are several initiatives shown here. The Bay Area Air Quality Management District continues to update its clean air plan, as well as to provide grant programs for local jurisdictions, businesses, and the public to improve air quality. The Bay Conservation and Development Commission, through their Bay Adapt process, is leading a 6-month effort to protect from rising sea levels. And of course, we've worked closely with them to integrate their ideas into the sea level rise element of Plan Bay Area 2050. Check out the websites shown here. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Ursula for our final round of Q&A.
Okay, thank you, Dave, and thank you everyone for participating in our Poll EV quiz here. And we will, again, we're collecting all of your comments, and we will be letting our commissioners and ABAG board members know in September all of what you've said. So thank you very much. So for the remainder of our time here, we will read some of the questions and comments in the Q&A box and ask staff to respond. If the remaining staff, Michael and Paul, could turn on their cameras, I'd appreciate it. So continue to write any questions and comments. I'm going to consolidate the comments just so you know, and I'm going to start with the questions, and we'll get to as many as we can. For those, as a reminder, for those of you joining by phone, we will let you know that you can't ask a question as part of this meeting. So please jot your questions down now, and after the workshop, you can call our comment line at 415-778-2292 and leave us a message with your comments, which again, we will enter into the final record. You can also always send us an email at info@planbayarea.org. Okay, so right now we have one question. On the Transportation Improvement Program, will there be an opportunity to accelerate the reconstruction of the Richmond Bridge? Not only I'd love to see it survive another earthquake, but I'd also want to see a rail connector using that bridge between Marin and Contra Costa counties. Maybe Adam?
Sure, I'll take a stab at this one. I would note the near-term transportation improvement program does include the near-term projects, and so it does include a lot of projects across the region. Just for reference, the idea to accelerate the project, it really would depend on the funding available. It would require obviously a commitment to fund the reconstruction of the project, so it really would be limited to the amount of funds are available at this time to really be able to accelerate the project. I would note that the Bay Area Toll Authority and others are actively obviously monitoring the condition of the bridge and making maintenance repairs as necessary. The long range plan, Plan Bay Area 2050, would certainly contemplate a reconstruction of the bridge, but in terms of acceleration, it really would be a function of how much funds are available at this time to actually do that work.
Okay, thank you, Adam. I think now we just have comments. So if you do have a question, please type it in now and I'll get to it before I turn it back over to Leslie. So a few comments. We should definitely adapt the land trust model and design walkable, bikeable neighborhoods with all daily use resources within 15 minutes. Another comment, we should also provide tax financial hedge funds and other methods for keeping high wealth out of the tax system. The elevated group rapid transit network goes above stoplights and stop signs, so it does not stop at intersection as buses must. It's an attractive option to moving through congestion at grade, enough to actually relieve congestion. And then we have, you mentioned a new bay crossing. I've studied the Dumbarton Rail Bridge, which is in shallow water. I would rebuild the bridge with the construction methods listed in the Q&A, including that the heavy rail that was in use previously. And another comment regarding valley to valley. The idea is to get manufacturers to expand into the Central Valley rather than adding jobs here. That way lots of people don't have to commute. And then we could do the GRT project discussed for the Richmond Bridge with a fraction of the cost. Okay, here's a question. If tolling is initiated on many freeways, whether it is demand-based or need-based, how will the fee structure be determined, and will it coordinate with reductions on other highway taxes or maybe tolls?
So I'll take this question. First of all, I want to just acknowledge that the all-lane tolling strategy is a concept. We're just studying it in the context of long-range planning. And in the draft blueprint, there were no all-lane tolling corridors in Marin County. We explored them mostly on freeways that parallel BART and Caltrain. So in the 5 more urbanized counties in the Central and South Bay parts of the region. What we did explore was a fee that folks would pay on a per mile basis. For single occupant vehicles, it was 15 cents per mile. For carpoolers, 5 cents per mile. And for low income users, it was 5 cents per mile. So for a typical 10-mile trip, it might be about $1.50 if you are a single occupant driver, and just 50 cents for a lower income driver. So that gives you a sense of that strategy. It's one of the most effective things we can do to address climate change is to price our roads, because right now our roadway system is quite subsidized. We often think of public transit as subsidized. Our highways are also subsidized. They don't pay for themselves entirely. And so by pricing the system, it not only finds a way to reflect those costs, but also it's a meaningful way to reduce carbon emissions.
Great, thank you, Dave. Oh.
Ursula, I think that brings us to the next question here, so maybe I'll just jump right in about the carbon emissions from the TIP projects that were brought up. So the Transportation Improvement Program has to be consistent with Plan Bay Area 2050. So although there isn't a greenhouse gas target for the TIP, it often funds projects that help move us in the right direction on GHG emissions.
Thanks, Dave. 2 questions in 1, very good. Okay, we have 2 final comments, and then I think I can turn it back to Leslie. So a comment: we need much more countywide authority in housing, police, fire, and K-12 schools. Too much duplication and lack of equity. And then also make public transit free for low income folks. So thank you everyone for your questions and comments. And we've captured all of your poll results and all of your comments, and your input will be fed into the blueprint and will be presented to our commission and ABAG executive board members in September, as I mentioned before. So now I'll turn it back to Leslie, who will wrap it up.
Thank you, Ursula. First, I want to thank you all for spending your morning here with us and providing your input. I want to take a few minutes more just to tell you what's next for Plan Bay Area 2050 and the draft blueprint. And also, I want to remind you of the ways that you can provide additional comments. We'll be sharing a link, so please share it with everyone you know so that we can get more folks at all of our remaining events. So the next steps for the draft blueprint include continuing public engagement through the public comment period, which ends on August 10. The Commission and ABAG board will take action on the final blueprint this fall. And then the selection of the preferred environmental alternative takes place by the end of 2020, with the adoption of Plan Bay Area 2050 slated for fall of 2021. To get additional information on the plan throughout the process and the draft blueprint, please go to planbayarea.org/blueprint for more information. There you can access background information, reports, and much of the information that we highlighted here today. You can also access the blueprint video at planbayarea.org/blueprint. And in addition, if you have more comments or more input to share, we do want to hear from you. You can send written comments via email by August 10 to info@planbayarea.org. And as we mentioned earlier, we have a comment line. If you'd like to leave a verbal comment, please call 415-778-2292. And finally, we have an online form for you to provide written comments on the Plan Bay Area 2050 website. Again, go to planbayarea.org/blueprint, and you can go to the public comments page where you can see the form to provide written comments. Thank you again for spending your valuable time with us. We know this is a very difficult time for so many of us. We really, really appreciate your participation today and all of your comments. If you would like to share anything else with us, please email us at info@planbayarea.org. Again, if you know someone who would like to participate, who should provide input into the process but cannot attend today, video of the presentation will be posted to the Plan Bay Area website. And also there is a link to the poll survey that you participated in today. So folks can participate online as well. So please help us spread the word. As we mentioned, we will be continuing hosting many more virtual events for other Bay Area counties. As a final reminder, the last day to comment is Monday, August 10th. Thank you again for your participation, and have a wonderful day. Thank you.